I've spent most of my life believing I could hear trouble before it arrived. Maybe that comes from 40 years of listening to tiny metal gears grind inside expensive watches, learning how one crooked tooth in a mechanism can destroy the whole machine. My name is Raymond Cole. I'm 62 years old, and to most people in our town, I'm just the quiet old man who owns a little clock and watch repair shop on Mercer Street. They see the magnifying glasses hanging around my neck, the grease under my fingernails, the old leather apron, and they assume I've lived a small life. I let them think that. It's easier that way. Small men are invisible. Invisible men survive longer. But none of the things I survived prepared me for the moment my youngest daughter grabbed my arm in the church parking lot and looked at me like I was already halfway dead. The evening air smelled like rain and wet pavement. Families were leaving Wednesday night service laughing and carrying casserole dishes to their cars while the church bells echoed softly over the darkening street. I remember the yellow glow from the parking lot lamps reflecting off the hood of my truck. I remember fishing my keys out of my coat pocket while thinking about the dinner Vanessa had planned at home. Family dinner, she called it. She'd spent 2 straight weeks talking about how important it was that we all sit together like a real family for once. My wife had a way of making ordinary things sound ceremonial. Vanessa could turn a grocery list into a performance. She was beautiful like that, beautiful in the polished, dangerous way a diamond blade is beautiful before it cuts your hand open. I was walking toward the driver's side door when I heard footsteps slapping across the pavement behind me. Dad. A voice cracked. Then, terrified, I turned around and saw Maddie running toward me in her oversized gray hoodie, the sleeves covering half her hands. She almost slipped on the wet asphalt before crashing into my chest hard enough to knock the breath out of me. At first, I thought she'd gotten hurt inside the church. Maybe another panic attack. Maybe she'd seen one of those older boys teasing her again. But then she looked up at me, and every fatherly instinct in my body went cold. Her face was white. Not pale. White. Like all the blood had drained out of her. Her lips trembled violently, and when she grabbed my wrist, her fingers felt like ice. Maddie? I said softly, crouching in front of her. Hey. Hey, what happened? Her eyes darted around the parking lot like someone was watching us. Dad, she whispered, and her voice shook so badly I could barely understand her. Don't sign anything tonight. I frowned. What? Please, she said louder, tears gathering in her eyes. Mom said after you sign, you won't wake up normal again. For a second, the entire world seemed to pause. Somewhere behind us, a car door slammed. Someone laughed near the church entrance. But all of it sounded distant, muffled, underwater. I stared at my daughter, trying to force my brain to make sense of the words that had just come out of her mouth. Vanessa had been talking for weeks about legal paperwork. She kept insisting my memory was slipping. She told our friends I forgot appointments. Told people I'd started repeating stories. Hell, she even convinced me to see a specialist after I misplaced my reading glasses twice in 1 month. It's just precautionary, baby, she'd say while rubbing my shoulders. I'm trying to protect you. Tonight's dinner was supposed to be about signing temporary authorization forms so she could help manage things if my health got worse. I'd laughed about it earlier that morning while drinking coffee in the kitchen. I told her she was acting like I was already buried. She kissed my cheek and smiled that smooth, elegant smile of hers. I just want to take care of you, Ray. Now my daughter was standing in a church parking lot trembling like prey hiding from a wolf. Sweetheart, I said carefully, what exactly did you hear? Maddie swallowed hard. Mom was talking to Grant in the study after school. My stomach tightened instantly at the sound of his name. Grant Ellis. Vanessa's son from her first marriage. 34 years old. Expensive suits. Expensive smile. Cheap soul. They thought I was upstairs, Maddie whispered. I heard them talking about medicine. Her voice cracked on the last word. Grant asked if you'd been drinking the tea every night. A strange pressure began building in my chest. Tea? Mom said yes. Maddie's eyes filled completely now. Then Grant said the medicine was working because you've been confused lately and people believe it now. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My mind flashed backward through the last 3 months. The headaches. The dizziness. The moments where my thoughts felt foggy around the edges. Vanessa bringing me herbal tea every night before bed, always insisting I finish it because it helped me sleep. Dad, Maddie's voice broke again. Grant said after tonight you won't have legal capacity anymore. The words hit me harder than a punch. Legal capacity. Not something a child invents. Not something an 11-year-old misunderstands. That was adult language. Lawyer language. My pulse began thudding in my ears. Did your mother say that? I asked quietly. Maddie nodded once. She said once you sign the papers, nobody will question anything anymore. Then she grabbed my jacket tighter and started crying openly. Dad, I'm scared. I wrapped my arms around her immediately, holding her against my chest while my own heartbeat hammered like a war drum beneath my ribs. Over her shoulder, I stared across the church parking lot into the rainy darkness, and for the first time in years, I felt something I thought age had beaten out of me a long time ago. Fear. Not fear for myself. Fear for my child. Because deep down beneath the confusion and disbelief, beneath the part of me desperately trying to explain all this away, another part of me had already started connecting the gears together. And when you spend your entire life fixing broken mechanisms, you learn one terrifying truth. Once the pieces start fitting perfectly, it usually means the machine was designed that way from the beginning. I kept replaying Maddie's words in my head the entire drive home. The windshield wipers dragged slowly across the glass, smearing the rain into long silver streaks under the streetlights. And every few seconds I caught my reflection in the dark window beside me. An old man with tired eyes, gray hair, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. A man beginning to look exactly like the kind of man people whispered about when they thought his mind was going. Maddie sat silently in the passenger seat beside me. She kept pulling the sleeves of her hoodie over her hands like she was trying to disappear inside the fabric. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt fragile, dangerous. Like one wrong word would make the whole thing real. When we turned into the long curved driveway of our house, every light inside was glowing warm and golden against the rain. From the outside, the place looked perfect. Vanessa always made sure of that. She understood appearances better than anyone I had ever known. The front garden was trimmed perfectly. The porch lanterns were polished. Soft jazz music floated faintly through the walls whenever guests came over. Our home looked like something from a magazine spread about elegant suburban success. That was Vanessa's gift. She could turn a lie into luxury. I parked the truck and sat there for a moment staring at the front door. Maddie reached over suddenly and grabbed my hand again. "Dad," she whispered, "please don't drink anything tonight." The fear in her voice cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I squeezed her hand gently and forced myself to smile. "I'm okay, sweetheart." But the truth was, I wasn't okay at all. Because for the first time in months, I had started looking backward instead of forward. And once I started remembering things, I couldn't stop. Vanessa became my second wife 6 years after my first marriage fell apart. By then, loneliness had hollowed me out in ways I never talked about. People think loneliness feels dramatic. It doesn't. Real loneliness is quiet. It's eating dinner alone in a dark kitchen. It's fixing things around the house nobody notices anymore. It's waking up at 3 in the morning and realizing nobody in the world would know if your heart stopped beating before sunrise. Then Vanessa walked into my life looking like warmth itself. Elegant dresses, soft perfume, that low soothing voice that made every sentence sound like concern. She touched my arm when she talked, looked into my eyes when I spoke, listened to me. Or at least she made me believe she did. At 62 years old, a man starts thinking maybe tenderness is worth trusting again. Maybe being loved late is better than never being loved at all. The front door opened before we even reached it. Vanessa stood there smiling beneath the chandelier light. Beautiful. Perfect. Her blonde hair curled softly around her shoulders, and she wore a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car. "There you are," she said sweetly. I was starting to worry. Then her eyes dropped to Maddie. The warmth vanished so quickly most people would have missed it. But I didn't. Not anymore. "Honey," Vanessa said carefully, "why are you shaking?" Maddie stepped closer to me instead of answering. Just for a second, Vanessa's jaw tightened. Then the smile returned instantly. "Sinless. Practiced." "Well," she laughed softly, "come inside before you both freeze to death." The dining room looked like a staged photograph. Candles flickering. Crystal glasses polished spotless. Expensive plates lined perfectly across the long oak table. Grant was already sitting there with one ankle resting on his knee, sipping wine like he belonged in some Manhattan penthouse instead of my house. He stood when we entered, flashing that smooth lawyer smile I had never trusted. "Ray," he said, "good to see you upright tonight." Grant Ellis was 34 years old and spent every waking second pretending he came from old money. Tailored suits. Designer watches bought on credit. Hair always perfectly styled. But beneath the polish was desperation. I'd seen men like him before during insurance investigations. Men drowning in debt while smiling through their tea. Men who mistook arrogance for class. "Evening, Grant," I said quietly. He looked me up and down. "Vanessa said you had another dizzy spell at the shop yesterday." I noticed Vanessa carefully watching my reaction while pouring wine. "It wasn't anything serious," I replied. "Hmm." Grant leaned back in his chair. "Still, at your age, these things matter." There it was again. That subtle poison. Not enough to insult me openly, just enough to make everyone at the table picture me as fragile, weak, slipping. Vanessa placed her hand softly on my shoulder. Poor Ray, she said with a sympathetic smile toward the others. His mind's been drifting lately. He forgot the Petersons' names last week. My stomach tightened instantly. I remembered that dinner. I remembered struggling to remember the husband's name for almost 10 full seconds while Vanessa rubbed my back in front of everyone like I was a confused patient. At the time, I'd laughed it off. But now the memory felt different. Sharp. Deliberate. I sat down slowly while Maddie remained quiet beside me. Grant reached into his leather briefcase and removed a thick stack of papers. Nothing stressful tonight, he said smoothly. Just the medical trust paperwork we discussed. Basic protections. If anything ever happens to you mentally or physically, Vanessa can manage things without courts getting involved. My eyes drifted toward the papers. Medical trust. Power authorization. Temporary asset control. Words blurred together strangely for a moment, and suddenly I remembered every single night Vanessa handed me tea before bed. Chamomile. Lavender. Lemon balm. It helps you sleep, baby, she always whispered while kissing my forehead. Then came the headaches. The trembling in my fingers. The moments where my thoughts felt wrapped in fog. The dizziness at work. Forgetting names. Forgetting appointments. Forgetting whether I'd locked the front door. And every single time it happened, Vanessa looked at me with that same carefully crafted sadness. Ray, she'd sigh softly, I think we should talk to someone. I realized then that what hurt most wasn't the possibility that they were trying to take my money. It wasn't even the possibility that I'd been poisoned. It was the realization that I had trusted her completely. After years of sleeping alone in silence, I had finally allowed someone close enough to hold my heart again. And now every memory with her suddenly felt contaminated. Like finding rot underneath polished wood. Grant slid the pen toward me across the table. Just signatures tonight, he said casually. Then Vanessa can help take some pressure off you. I stared at the pen for a long moment while the candlelight flickered against the silverware between us. Across the table, Vanessa smiled at me lovingly, patiently, beautifully. But for the first time since I met her, I noticed something hiding underneath that smile. Not affection, not concern, hunger. I stared at the pen for what felt like an hour while the candlelight danced across the stack of papers in front of me. Vanessa's hand still rested lightly on my shoulder. Soft, elegant, possessive. Grant leaned back in his chair pretending patience, but I could see it in his eyes now. Hunger. Impatience. The same look I used to see on wealthy clients trying too hard to act calm while waiting for an insurance payout after their unfortunate accident. Suddenly the room felt too warm, too polished, too rehearsed. Maddie was sitting silently beside me with both hands clenched in her lap beneath the table. I could feel her fear radiating off her like cold air. That fear saved my life. I slowly set the pen down and rubbed my forehead. Head's killing me tonight, I muttered. Vanessa's expression changed instantly into practiced concern. Oh, baby, she whispered. You see? This is exactly why we need these protections. Grant pushed the papers another inch toward me. Just sign tonight, Ray. Then you can rest. I looked at the papers one more time before forcing out a tired sigh. I need air first. Grant's smile tightened. Vanessa glanced at him quickly before turning back to me. Raymond, sweetheart, we already scheduled everyone for tonight. Then they can wait 10 minutes. My voice came out firmer than I intended. The room went still for half a second. Grant recovered first, raising both hands like a diplomat avoiding conflict. Of course, he said smoothly. Take your time. Vanessa leaned down and kissed my cheek. Her perfume smelled like jasmine and poison. Don't be too long, baby. Maddie followed me the second I stood up. I grabbed my coat from the hallway hook while my pulse hammered so hard I could hear blood moving behind my ears. The moment the front door shut behind us, Maddie exhaled shackily like she'd been holding her breath underwater. Rain had started falling harder now. Thin silver needles under the streetlights. I opened the truck door for her, climbed behind the wheel, and backed out of the driveway without looking at the house again. Where are we going? Maddie whispered. To see someone I should have called weeks ago, I said quietly. Joe Mercer's diner sat on the edge of the old industrial district near the railroad tracks. Most people avoided that side of town after dark. Rusted warehouses, flickering neon signs, potholes filled with rainwater reflecting red brake lights like pools of blood. But Joe kept his diner open 24 hours because old habits die hard in retired detectives. The bell above the diner door jingled when we walked inside. Warm air wrapped around us instantly, thick with the smell of coffee, fried onions, and old wood polish. A country song played softly from the jukebox in the corner. Joe stood behind the counter wiping a glass with a towel that probably hadn't been cleaned since 1998. He was 67 now. Big shoulders gone soft with age. White beard. Crooked nose from an old bar fight. But his eyes were still cop eyes. Sharp. Tired. Impossible to fool. The second he saw my face, the towel stopped moving. Jesus Christ, he muttered. You look like hell, Ray. Need the back booth, I said. Private. Joe looked from me to Maddie and immediately nodded. Coffee's on me tonight. We slid into the far corner booth beneath the broken neon beer sign. Rain rattled softly against the windows while Maddie wrapped both hands around a mug of hot chocolate Joe placed in front of her. Her fingers still trembled. Joe sat across from us slowly. Start talking. I looked at Maddie gently. Tell him exactly what you heard. She swallowed hard. Mom was talking to Grant in the study after school. Her voice cracked immediately. They thought I was upstairs. Joe's expression darkened slightly. Maddie stared down into the cup while speaking. Grant asked if Dad had been drinking the tea every night. My chest tightened again hearing it out loud. Then Mom laughed. Maddie's eyes filled with tears. She said after the papers are signed, we move him to the facility. Joe's jaw flexed once. Maddie kept going in a whisper so quiet I almost couldn't hear her. Grant asked what about me. Her lip trembled violently now. Mom said the girl can go to boarding school. She started crying softly. Then Grant laughed and said the old fool will never prove anything. Silence swallowed the booth completely after that. Even the diner noise felt far away suddenly. Joe leaned back slowly, rubbing his beard while staring at me. You believe her? He asked quietly. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into the inside pocket of my coat and pulled out an old silver pocket watch. The metal casing was scratched with age. Most people thought it was sentimental junk from another century. I flipped it open carefully. The ticking sounded soft but precise beneath the hum of the diner lights. Then I pressed my thumb against the tiny hidden groove beneath the hinge. A red light blinked once inside the mechanism before disappearing again. Joe's eyes narrowed instantly. You still have that thing? Never stopped carrying it. Maddie looked confused while I turned the watch over slowly in my palm. That isn't just a watch, I said softly to her. Years ago, I used it during investigations. Joe gave a low, humorless chuckle. Kid probably thinks you fix watches for a living. I looked down at the ticking hands moving steadily beneath the glass. That's what Vanessa thinks too. Then I closed the watch gently and slipped it back into my pocket. They think I fix watches. I looked up at Joe finally. They forgot I know how to measure time, patience, and lies. Joe stared at me for several long seconds before nodding once. The old detective was gone now. I could see the investigator returning behind his eyes. All right then, he said quietly. Let's find out exactly how deep this thing goes before your wife buries you alive. The rain had slowed to a thin mist by the time I pulled back into the driveway. The house stood glowing at the end of the stone path like nothing inside it could possibly be rotten. Warm golden windows. Soft piano music drifting faintly through the walls. A home designed to calm suspicion before it even entered the front door. Joe had wanted me to stay at the diner longer. He wanted to call people, run background checks, start digging immediately. But I knew men like Grant Ellis. The second I disappeared for too long, he would smell fear. Men like him only respected control. And tonight, I needed them confident. I needed them relaxed enough to keep talking. Maddie sat silently beside me as I killed the engine. Her eyes drifted toward the house the way children look at thunderstorms through bedroom windows. You don't have to come inside yet, I told her gently. You can wait in the truck if you want. She shook her head immediately. I don't want you alone with them. Not Mom. Not Grant. That single word cut deeper than she realized. I reached over and squeezed her shoulder before stepping out into the cold, damp air. My knees ached climbing the porch steps, though I couldn't tell anymore whether it was age or rage making my body feel heavier tonight. The moment we entered the house, Vanessa appeared from the dining room carrying that same perfect smile she wore for neighbors and charity events. There you are, she said warmly. We were worried. Her voice floated through the hallway like silk. Elegant. Controlled. Beautiful enough to fool anyone who hadn't watched her eyes closely. But I watched them now. They moved too quickly toward the papers on the dining room table before returning to my face. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about the signatures. The dining room smelled like rosemary chicken, candle wax, and expensive perfume. Eleanor Brooks sat near the far end of the table draped in dark emerald silk and enough jewelry to feed a family for a year. Vanessa's mother had the kind of face that looked permanently disappointed by other people's existence. Sharp cheekbones, thin lips, eyes cold as old coins. She glanced up at me over the rim of her wineglass and offered a smile that never reached her eyes. Raymond, she said dryly, you're looking tired. Translation, old, weak, slipping. Claire sat beside Grant with nervous tension written all over her face. My oldest daughter always looked like she was apologizing for taking up space in a room. Grant had perfected the insecurity inside her over the past year. Every compliment he gave came attached to subtle criticism. Every promise made her smaller before pretending to save her. Claire looked up when I entered, visibly relieved. Dad, she said softly, you okay? Long day at the shop. I forced a faint smile. Old gears fight back eventually. Grant chuckled like I'd told a charming little joke. He stood immediately, pulling out my chair with exaggerated politeness. Sit down, Ray. Vanessa's been anxious about you all evening. I noticed the expensive watch on his wrist before sitting. Fake confidence wrapped in polished steel. Men drowning in debt often bought expensive things because appearances became survival. Where's your latest investment office again? I asked casually while removing my coat. Grant froze for half a second. Tiny. Almost invisible. Then he smiled smoothly. Downtown. Temporary space while expansion paperwork clears. Lie. I'd spent too many years investigating fraudulent claims not to recognize rehearsed answers. Claire looked between us nervously. Grant's company is about to land major investors, she said carefully, almost like she needed me to approve. That's wonderful, I replied softly. Grant's smile widened. Vanessa moved behind my chair then. I smelled jasmine before I felt her hand settle gently onto my shoulders. You're trembling again, she whispered near my ear. See? This is what scares me. Her fingers squeezed lightly. A performance for the room. The loving second wife caring for her declining husband. Then she disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later carrying a steaming porcelain cup. My stomach tightened instantly. Herbal tea. Of course. Special blend tonight, Vanessa said sweetly while placing it beside me. It'll help you relax. I stared at the steam curling upward from the cup. Suddenly, every night over the past few months replayed in fragments. Vanessa carrying tea upstairs. Vanessa watching me drink it. Vanessa rubbing my chest when dizziness hit. Vanessa telling friends I'd become forgetful lately. God. The manipulation hadn't started weeks ago. It had started months ago. Drink before it cools, Eleanor said sharply from across the table. Vanessa works hard taking care of you. There it was again. The narrative. The fragile old husband. The devoted wife. I wrapped my fingers around the cup but didn't drink. Grant reached into his leather briefcase beside the table and removed a clean stack of documents. Thick. Official. Prepared. Now, he said smoothly, just some simple medical trust authorizations, in case your condition progresses. Claire shifted uncomfortably. Grant says it's only temporary protection, Dad. Of course it is, Eleanor added. Families with assets do this all the time. Assets. Not family. Assets. Grant slid the papers toward me carefully along with a black fountain pen. This gives Vanessa authority to manage medical decisions and finances if your cognitive state declines. He spoke like a man explaining kindergarten math to a child. I lowered my eyes toward the documents while forcing my hands to shake slightly. Easy enough now. Rage creates convincing tremors. Behind the staircase near the hallway shadows, I spotted Maddie watching silently between the wooden railings. Her face looked pale beneath the dim light, terrified eyes fixed entirely on me. She thought this was the moment they would take me away. I picked up the pen slowly. The room became so quiet I could hear the clock ticking above the fireplace. Grant leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Vanessa stopped breathing. Eleanor watched like a vulture waiting for an animal to finally collapse. I let the pen hover over the signature line. Then I deliberately loosened my grip. My hand jerked sideways violently. The porcelain cup tipped over instantly. Scalding tea flooded across the table, soaking the paperwork in dark brown waves. Claire gasped. Vanessa jumped backward. Grant shot out of his chair so fast it nearly slammed into the wall. Jesus Christ, he snapped. His voice cracked with pure fury before he caught himself. Too late. For 1 second, the real Grant surfaced. Not polished. Not charming. Angry. Ordered. Dangerous. I stared down at my trembling hands and forced shame into my expression. I'm sorry, I whispered weakly. My hands, they've been shaking lately. Vanessa recovered first. Oh, Ray, she said softly, but I caught the flash of panic in her eyes as the ink bled across the ruined pages. Grant grabbed the papers furiously, muttering curses under his breath while trying to separate them. That was when I saw it. Hanging halfway out of the inside pocket of his briefcase was a silver keycard attached to a black tag. The words printed across it were small, but years of examining tiny watch engravings trained my eyes better than most men half my age. Willow Crest Neurological Care Facility. My pulse slowed instantly. Not fear, clarity. Because suddenly the entire machine clicked together inside my head with terrifying precision. The T, the paperwork, the diagnosis, the facility. They weren't trying to help me. They were preparing to bury me alive. I barely slept that night. I lay beside Vanessa in the dark while rain tapped softly against the bedroom windows and listened to the slow rhythm of her breathing. Calm, steady, peaceful. The breathing of someone with no fear left inside them. Every few minutes she would shift slightly beneath the blankets and press herself closer to me as if she were still the woman who once claimed she couldn't fall asleep without hearing my heartbeat. I stared into the darkness above our bed and realized something horrifying. The most dangerous predators are never the loud ones. They survive because they learn how to look safe. Around 3 in the morning, Vanessa stirred beside me and rested her hand gently against my chest. You awake? She whispered sleepily. I closed my eyes immediately and forced my breathing slower. A few seconds passed. Then I felt her fingers slide carefully beneath my pillow. My entire body went rigid beneath the blankets while I kept pretending to sleep. Paper rustled softly. She was checking whether I'd hidden the ruined documents from dinner. When she found nothing, her hand lingered there for another moment before slowly withdrawing. Then she kissed my shoulder lightly. Poor Ray, she whispered into the darkness. You're making this harder than it has to be. I didn't move again until sunrise. By 7:30 the next morning, I was sitting in my truck outside Samuel Pike's clinic across town. The building looked exactly the same as it had 20 years ago. Small brick exterior, white shutters, a faded blue sign hanging crooked beside the entrance. Sam never cared about appearances. He cared about facts. That was why I trusted him. We met back when I still worked high-end insurance investigations for private firms handling fraud cases among wealthy clients. Sam had testified in 3 of my investigations after spotting forged neurological diagnoses hidden inside medical records worth millions in estate disputes. He hated corruption with the kind of quiet intensity only honest men possess. I entered through the side door wearing sunglasses and an old baseball cap pulled low. Paranoia changes a man quickly. 48 hours ago, I still believed my biggest problem was aging. Now I was sneaking into medical offices like a fugitive inside my own life. Sam was already waiting in the examination room when the nurse closed the door behind me. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner. More gray in the beard. But his eyes sharpened instantly the moment he saw my face. Jesus, he muttered. Joe called me last night. Sit down. I lowered myself onto the chair slowly while Sam studied me with clinical focus. How long have the symptoms been happening? He asked. Couple months. Dizziness? Yeah. Memory gaps? Sometimes. Hand tremors? I looked down at my fingers. More lately. Sam nodded once without speaking. Then he rolled his stool closer. Raymond, I need you to answer one thing honestly before we do these tests. His voice dropped lower. Has anyone been controlling your medication or food? The question settled over the room like cold fog. I thought about Vanessa standing in the kitchen every night preparing tea. Vanessa reminding me to drink every drop. Vanessa telling friends my mind was slipping while rubbing my shoulder like a devoted caretaker. Yes, I answered quietly. Sam's expression hardened instantly. Blood work took less than 20 minutes. Waiting for the results felt longer than the entire night before. I sat alone in the small office staring at medical posters while my thoughts moved with terrifying clarity now that fear had burned away most of the confusion. Suddenly, everything connected perfectly. Vanessa encouraging me to retire fully from consulting work. Grant insisting I stop managing my own accounts because stress affects memory. The sudden concern over my cognitive decline. The specialist Vanessa conveniently found through one of her charity friends. The paperwork. The facility. The tea. Ah. They'd been building this slowly, carefully, like people digging a grave one shovel at a time. The door finally opened. Sam stepped back inside holding the lab report in one hand. His face told me the answer before he spoke. You're not developing dementia, he said flatly. I felt my heartbeat stop for half a second. Then what is it? Sam placed the papers on the desk between us. Low-dose benzodiazepines, sedatives, plus traces of cognitive suppressants. He looked directly into my eyes. Somebody's been poisoning you slowly. The room became very quiet. Not dramatic, not explosive, just still. I stared down at the report while my mind replayed every evening teacup Vanessa had ever handed me. Would it cause confusion? I asked. Yes. Memory problems? Yes. Tremors? Absolutely. Sam folded his arms tightly. Long enough exposure, and it can imitate early neurological decline. I leaned back slowly in the chair. Strangely, the pain disappeared in that moment. Up until then, some part of me had still been searching for another explanation. Misunderstanding, fear, manipulation from Grant alone. But now the truth stood completely naked in front of me. My wife had not panicked about my health. She had manufactured my illness. There's more, Sam said carefully. He slid another paper toward me. I checked recent consultation requests under your insurance records. I lowered my eyes to the page. Private neurological evaluation request. Submitted 3 weeks earlier. Physician approval recommending cognitive monitoring for early dementia symptoms. Signed by a doctor I had never met. Bot diagnosis, Sam muttered bitterly. Classic setup. I read the document twice before setting it down again. Early dementia. Loss of legal competency. Medical trust activation. Asset transfer authority. Long-term neurological care facility. Every piece of the machine finally revealed itself. They wanted me declared mentally unfit. They wanted Vanessa controlling every financial decision. They wanted me locked inside Willow Crest while Grant bled my estate dry. And worst of all, they wanted Maddie removed before she could become a problem. Boarding school. Isolation. Silence. Claire would be manipulated financially until she depended completely on Grant. They weren't just stealing money. They were dismantling my family piece by piece. Sam watched me closely. You okay? He asked quietly. I thought about that question carefully. A week ago, I would have said no. A week ago, I would have asked why Vanessa did this. Whether any of it had been real. Whether she ever loved me at all. But something inside me had changed overnight. The hurt was still there. Deep. Heavy. But it no longer controlled me. Pain had cooled into something far more dangerous. Calculation. I stood slowly and folded the lab results into my coat pocket. Ray? Sam asked again. I looked toward the rain sliding down the clinic windows. I'm past asking why now, I said quietly. Then I picked up my car keys and headed for the door. Now I just want to know when they plan to finish the job. I waited 2 days before talking to Claire. Not because I was afraid of her reaction, but because I needed time to bury the part of me that still wanted to protect everyone from the truth. Once you realize your own wife has been poisoning you, something inside your brain changes permanently. The world stops feeling soft. Every smile becomes evidence. Every conversation becomes strategy. Still, Claire was my daughter. My little girl with paint on her fingers and sketchbooks scattered across the kitchen table. The child who used to fall asleep on my chest while I repaired watches late at night in the shop. I kept telling myself there had to be a way to warn her gently, to save her without destroying her. That illusion died the moment I walked into her apartment and saw Grant already there. Claire rented a loft downtown above an old furniture warehouse converted into overpriced artist studios. Exposed brick walls. Tall industrial windows. Half-finished interior sketches pinned across drafting boards. The place smelled faintly like coffee, cedar wood, and stress. Claire always lived inside unfinished dreams. That was the problem. People like Grant could smell ambition mixed with insecurity from miles away. He was standing near the kitchen island when I arrived, sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, pouring wine into crystal glasses like he owned the place already. Ray, he said smoothly, didn't know you were coming by. Lie. He always knew. Men like Grant monitored everything. Claire looked up from her laptop and smiled nervously. Dad. She crossed the room to hug me, but even that hug felt distracted. Like her mind was somewhere else entirely. I noticed dark circles beneath her eyes. Too many late nights. Too much pressure. Grant handed her a glass of wine and rested his hand lightly against the small of her back. Possession disguised as affection. We were just talking about the investor presentation, he said casually. Claire's designs are finally getting serious attention. I glanced toward the architectural renderings spread across the table. Boutique hotels. Luxury interiors. Modern restaurant concepts. Claire had real talent. But talent becomes vulnerable when someone convinces you they're the only person who believes in it. Looks impressive, I said quietly. Claire brightened slightly. Grant thinks we can launch the firm by spring if the funding clears. Funding. Another carefully baited hook. I lowered myself slowly into the chair across from them while Grant remained standing. Predators liked height advantage during conversations. Claire, I said carefully, I need to talk to you privately. I watched Grant's expression freeze for the briefest moment before he smiled again. Of course, he said lightly. I'll step outside. But Claire shook her head almost immediately. It's okay. You can say it in front of him. My chest tightened a little. Not because she trusted Grant, because she trusted him more than she realized. I looked at my daughter for a long moment before speaking. I went to see Dr. Pike. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Why? Because something's wrong. Grant moved quietly toward the kitchen sink behind her, pretending to rinse his glass while listening to every word. The symptoms Vanessa's been talking about. I kept my eyes on Claire. They're not dementia. Claire frowned immediately. Dad, Sam found sedatives in my blood. Silence hit the room hard. Claire blinked twice like she hadn't heard me correctly. What? Someone's been drugging me. Grant laughed softly behind us. Not loud. Just enough disbelief to sound insulting. Ray, he said carefully, that's a pretty serious accusation. I ignored him completely. Claire, listen to me. My voice stayed calm. Controlled. Vanessa and Grant are trying to declare me mentally incompetent. Claire stared at me in stunned confusion. Dad, what are you talking about? The paperwork. The medical trust. Willow Crest. Her face changed instantly at the facility name. Tiny reaction. Fear maybe. Recognition. How do you know about Willow Crest? She asked quietly. Grant stepped forward smoothly before I could answer. Because he's spiraling, he said gently to her. Claire, this is exactly what your mother's been worried about. Mother. Not Vanessa. Clever. Always positioning her as family while turning me into the unstable outsider. I looked at Claire again. Sweetheart, I need you to hear me carefully. They've been planning this for months. Claire shook her head slowly now. No. Yes. No, Dad. Her voice cracked harder this time. Vanessa takes care of you. She's poisoning me. Stop. She stood abruptly from the table. Tears were already building in her eyes now. Do you hear yourself? Grant moved beside her instantly, one hand settling gently on her shoulder like a savior arriving at exactly the right moment. Claire, I said softly, I have proof from Sam. Sam Pike is your friend. He's also a doctor. And maybe Vanessa is right. The words hit harder than I expected. Claire folded her arms tightly around herself while staring at me with terrified frustration. Maybe you are paranoid. The room went completely still after that. I felt something inside my chest crack quietly. Not anger. Worse. Grief. Because in that moment, I realized they'd already started taking my family away from me piece by piece. Claire wasn't stupid. She was trapped. Manipulated slowly through love, ambition, and emotional dependence until trusting Grant felt safer than trusting her own instincts. I saw it clearly now. Every exhausted expression. Every nervous apology. Every time she looked toward him before answering questions. Grant wasn't just controlling her financially. He was teaching her to doubt herself. And now he was teaching her to doubt me too. Claire wiped at her eyes angrily. You think everyone's conspiring against you because you're scared of getting older. I lowered my gaze briefly. God, she sounded exactly like Vanessa now. Maybe you should sign the papers, she whispered. Maybe you need help. Grant looked at me then. Calm. Victorious. But I noticed something underneath the confidence now. Tension. Because he expected me to explode. That was the trap. Angry old man. Unstable father. More evidence. Instead, I stood slowly and picked up my coat. Claire looked startled immediately. Dad. It's okay. My voice came out quieter than hers. Gentler. That seemed to confuse her more than anger would have. I walked toward her carefully and kissed the top of her head the same way I used to when she was little. You don't have to believe me today. Her body stiffened slightly beneath the touch. But one day, I whispered, you're going to remember this conversation and realize I was trying to save you too. Grant's eyes followed me the entire way to the door. Calculating. Suspicious. But I no longer cared whether they believed me or not. The truth didn't need permission to exist. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I understood something clearly. I could not force Claire to open her eyes. I could only survive long enough for the mask to fall off in front of her naturally. Because lies built on manipulation always collapse eventually. The only question was how much blood they spilled before they did. 3 days after my conversation with Claire, Vanessa arranged what she called a wellness evaluation. The phrase itself sounded clean. Harmless. Modern people always rename cruelty until it sounds compassionate. The appointment was scheduled at a private neurological clinic downtown inside a glass building overlooking the river. Everything about the place screamed expensive discretion. White marble floors. Soft instrumental music. Receptionists who smiled without warmth. The kind of clinic wealthy families used when they wanted embarrassing problems hidden quietly behind polished walls. Vanessa held my arm the entire walk from the parking garage to the elevator like I was fragile enough to collapse at any second. Every few feet she would glance toward strangers nearby with those carefully sad eyes of hers. The devoted wife carrying the burden of a declining husband. She deserved an award for the performance. Grant met us in the lobby wearing another tailored suit that probably cost 3 months of Claire's rent. He carried a leather folder tucked under one arm and smiled the second he saw me. Not concern. Anticipation. Like a gambler watching dice roll toward his favorite number. "Morning, Ray," he said lightly. "How are we feeling today?" I looked at him blankly for 2 seconds longer than necessary before answering. "Little tired." His eyes flickered instantly toward Vanessa. Satisfaction. They were watching me constantly now, measuring every hesitation, every pause, every misplaced word. That was the game. Convinced the world one was disappearing mentally while slowly pushing me toward legal extinction. But the moment Sam confirmed the poisoning, fear stopped controlling me. Clarity replaced it. And clarity made acting easier than people realized. Inside the examination room, a young neurologist asked simple cognitive questions while Vanessa answered half of them for me before I could speak. Raymond has been confused lately. He forgets names. Sometimes he gets agitated. Agitated. Another carefully chosen word. Grant stood near the wall with folded arms pretending concern while secretly enjoying every second of it. The doctor asked me to repeat a sequence of numbers backward. I deliberately hesitated too long. He asked today's date. I gave the wrong month. Vanessa sighed softly beside me and lowered her eyes like a woman carrying unbearable emotional weight. The performance almost impressed me. Almost. Then came the final part. The doctor asked me to sign my name on a digital tablet. I picked up the stylus slowly and let my hand tremble violently before scribbling halfway across the screen. Grant looked down immediately to hide his smile. Vanessa touched my shoulder gently. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "Nobody is upset." I lowered my head and forced my breathing uneven. Broken old man. Confused husband. Exactly what they needed. The doctor stepped outside after that to review observations. The second the door closed, Grant exhaled sharply through his nose like he'd been holding excitement inside his body for an hour. "This is progressing faster than I expected," he muttered quietly. Vanessa glanced toward the door before speaking. "Good. The sooner we stabilize things legally, the safer this becomes." Safer. I almost laughed. A few minutes later, the neurologist returned holding paperwork. Given the cognitive symptoms and prior recommendations in his file, he said carefully, "I think temporary supervised care would be beneficial while we continue evaluation." There it was. The trap closing. Vanessa nodded immediately with heartbreaking concern painted across her face. Whatever helps him. Grant opened his folder instantly. Already prepared. Already waiting. The transfer documents were signed less than 20 minutes later. Temporary neurological residential care at Willow Crest. Observation period pending competency review. My entire life reduced to paperwork. They expected me to fight. Refusal would support the narrative of paranoia and instability. But instead I looked down at my shaking hands and whispered softly, "Maybe they're right." Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. Grant nearly smiled. That was the moment they truly believed they'd won. By late afternoon, the transport car waited outside our house. A black luxury sedan with tinted windows. Not an ambulance. That would look cruel. Willow Crest specialized in making imprisonment resemble comfort. I walked slowly through the front hallway carrying a small overnight bag while Vanessa followed beside me speaking in soothing tones about rest and recovery. Eleanor stood near the dining room pretending sadness so badly it bordered on comedy. Grant remained by the doorway checking documents on his phone like a businessman closing another profitable deal. Then I heard footsteps running down the stairs. Maddie. She hit me so hard around the waist I almost lost balance. "No," she cried immediately. "No, no, no." Her whole body shook violently against me. "Dad, don't go with them." Vanessa's expression hardened instantly before softening again when she noticed Grant watching. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "your father needs help." Maddie looked up at her with raw terror in her eyes. "You're lying." Silence flooded the hallway. Even Grant looked briefly uncomfortable. I crouched slowly in front of my daughter while my chest tightened so painfully I could barely breathe. Ah, she really thought they were taking me away forever. Maybe they were. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket carefully and removed the silver pocket watch. The old metal surface felt cold against my palm. Maddie recognized it immediately. I'd carried that watch almost her entire life. "Listen to me carefully," I whispered while pressing it into her small, trembling hands. "When it stops ticking, call Joe." Her tear-filled eyes searched my face desperately. Why? Just promise me. She nodded shackily. I closed her fingers around the watch and held them there for one extra second. The device hidden inside wasn't just an old recorder anymore. Years ago, during a fraud investigation involving a staged kidnapping, I had a private technician modify it with emergency tracking hardware and a silent distress transmitter linked to a timed signal system. Nobody knew that except Joe, not even Vanessa. The watch would stop ticking the moment I activated the internal trigger, and when it did, Joe would know exactly where I was. Vanessa touched my shoulder softly. Raymond, we need to leave. I looked up at her slowly. Beautiful face. Calm eyes. Perfect wife mask still flawless under the warm hallway lights. But now I could finally see what lived underneath it clearly. Not love. Not guilt. Relief. I stood carefully while Maddie clung to my coat sleeve one last time. Dad, she whispered brokenly. I kissed her forehead gently and forced myself not to look back again as Grant opened the front door. Cold evening air rushed inside immediately. The black sedan waited at the curb like a hearse disguised as luxury transportation. And as I stepped toward it beside the people trying to erase me from my own life, I realized something strange. I wasn't walking into a prison. I was walking directly into the wolves' den on purpose. Willow Crest looked beautiful from the outside. That was the first thing I noticed as the black sedan rolled through the iron gates just after sunset. Expensive places always understand one simple truth about evil. If you wrap cruelty in enough marble and soft lighting, wealthy people will call it care. The facility sat on a hill overlooking the river beyond the city. White stone walls, perfect gardens, quiet fountains glowing beneath landscape lights. The kind of place families bragged about when abandoning relatives they no longer wanted to deal with. A smiling nurse opened my car door before the engine even stopped running. Welcome to Willow Crest, Mr. Cole, she said warmly, like I'd arrived at a luxury resort instead of my own burial site. Inside, the air smelled sterile beneath layers of lavender diffuser oil. Soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers in the ceilings. Every hallway gleamed spotless under warm lighting designed to calm wealthy guilt. But beneath the perfume and polished floors, I felt it immediately. Fear. Not mine. Theirs. The residents moved slowly through the common areas wearing expensive sweaters and blank expressions. Some stared silently at televisions that weren't even turned on. Others sat alone in wheelchairs facing windows like forgotten furniture. One old man near the fireplace kept muttering the same sentence over and over under his breath. I told them I wasn't sick. Nobody listened to him anymore. That was the real prison here. Not locked doors. Erased credibility. Once enough people called you confused, your truth stopped mattering. The intake process lasted almost 2 hours. Blood pressure checks, cognitive evaluations, medication reviews. Every answer I gave was written down with careful little notes beside it while nurses exchanged subtle looks over clipboards. Patient appears disoriented. Mild memory instability. Paranoid tendencies regarding family members. They were building my coffin one observation at a time. Around 9 that night, a nurse entered my room carrying a small plastic cup and syringe. Evening medication, Mr. Cole. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed while she prepared the injection. What is it? I asked softly. Just something to help you rest. Lie. I recognized the faint chemical smell immediately from old insurance investigations involving overmedicated elderly patients. Sedatives. Enough to fog the brain, not enough to kill quickly. The nurse noticed my hesitation and gave me the same smile people use on frightened children. Confused patients usually sleep better after the first dose. Confused patient. Just like that. My entire identity reduced to a label. Husband. Father. Investigator. Provider. Gone. I rolled up my sleeve without arguing. Sometimes survival means letting predators believe you're already weak. The needle slid into my arm smoothly. Cold liquid spread through my veins seconds later. I lowered my eyes and pretended embarrassment while the nurse adjusted my blanket afterward like I was already incapable of doing it myself. Try to relax, Mr. Cole, she whispered kindly. Your family only wants what's best for you. Family. I almost laughed out loud. The room itself looked comfortable enough to fool outsiders. Soft cream walls, large windows, expensive furniture, private bathroom. But the windows only opened 3 inches. The doors locked automatically after 10 p.m., and every corner of the ceiling contained small black security cameras disguised inside smoke detectors. Luxury prison. Around noon the next day, Vanessa arrived. I saw her through the glass doors before she entered my room. Elegant black coat, dark sunglasses, hair perfectly styled despite the rain outside. She carried white lilies because flowers made abandonment look compassionate. The moment the nurse opened the door, Vanessa's expression collapsed into practiced heartbreak. "Oh, Ray," she whispered tearfully while rushing to my bedside. "How are you feeling today?" The nurse lingered nearby, watching closely while Vanessa stroked my hair gently. "He was so independent before all this," she said sadly to her. "Watching him decline has been unbearable." The nurse gave her a sympathetic smile. "You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Cole." Vanessa lowered her eyes modestly like a grieving saint carrying impossible burdens. The performance was flawless. Then the nurse finally left the room. Silence settled immediately. Vanessa's hand stopped moving through my hair. Slowly, she removed her sunglasses and looked at me with complete emotional emptiness for the first time since we met. No softness. No affection. No mask. "You should have stayed small, Ray," she said quietly. Her voice sounded colder than the rain outside. I remained motionless on the bed while the recorder hidden beneath the frame of my reading glasses captured every word. Vanessa walked slowly toward the window with her arms folded. "Men like you always make the same mistake." She glanced back at me faintly. "You think being kind makes you safe." My jaw tightened slightly, but I forced my face slack again. "Confused patient. Weak old man. A quiet man should die quietly," she said softly. Then she smiled. God. That smile terrified me more than anger ever could. Before leaving, she leaned down and kissed my forehead gently just as footsteps approached outside the hallway again. The loving wife returned instantly. "I'll visit again tomorrow, sweetheart," she whispered loudly enough for the staff to hear. The second she disappeared, Grant entered carrying another leather folder beneath one arm. He closed the door carefully behind him and pulled a chair beside the bed. "You know," he said casually while removing documents, "this would all go smoother if you cooperated. Property transfers, signature authorizations, emergency financial control agreements." They weren't even hiding it anymore. "Your condition is progressing fast," Grant continued smoothly. "Soon the court won't require your consent anyway." He slid the pen toward me. "But voluntary compliance looks better." I let my fingers tremble violently while staring at the pages. Grant watched me closely. Impatient, confident, greedy. "Come on, Ray," he muttered. "You barely understand what day it is anymore." Another lie captured clearly by the recorder. I lowered my head weakly and allowed the pen to slip from my hand onto the floor. Grant cursed under his breath immediately. Jesus Christ. There he was again. The real man beneath the polished suit. Angry. Desperate. Predatory. After he finally left, I remained still for nearly an hour listening to the distant sounds of Willow Crest breathing around me. Wheelchairs squeaking down hallways. Nurses murmuring behind closed doors. Elderly voices crying softly in the night. Then I started noticing patterns. Family visits always happened near financial review meetings. Certain residents suddenly disappeared after competency evaluations. One old woman named Helen whispered to me during dinner that her son sold her house 2 weeks after bringing her here. Another man claimed his daughter stopped answering calls the moment he transferred control of his accounts. They weren't treating patients at Willow Crest. They were processing inheritances. And suddenly my anger stopped being personal. This place wasn't just trying to erase me. It had been swallowing people for years. Quietly, legally, respectably. I sat alone beside the dark window that night while river lights flickered far below the hill and realized something dangerous was happening inside me. I no longer wanted escape. I wanted destruction. Not only for Vanessa. Not only for Grant. For all of them. Every smiling doctor. Every paid evaluator. Every polished executive hiding greed behind words like care and dignity. They thought they had trapped a confused old man inside a white room. What they actually did was lock an investigator inside the center of the crime scene. The third night inside Willow Crest, they increased my medication. I knew because my hands felt heavier when I woke up, and the edges of the room drifted slightly whenever I turned my head too fast. That was how they did it here. Not enough drugs to kill you quickly. Just enough to make your reality soft around the edges until nobody trusted your version of events anymore. Outside my window, rain crawled slowly down the glass beneath the pale glow of security lights, and somewhere down the hallway an old woman cried for her husband for almost an hour before the nurses finally sedated her too. I sat alone in the silence afterward thinking about Maddie, wondering if she was sleeping, wondering if Vanessa had already started poisoning her mind against me the same way she poisoned my body. Then sometime after midnight, the tiny vibration hidden inside the emergency transmitter sewn beneath my watch strap pulsed once against my wrist. Soft. Breathe. Most people would never notice it, but I noticed everything. The pocket watch had stopped ticking. Maddie had opened it. Back at the house, my daughter sat alone on the floor of her bedroom, hugging her knees while the silver pocket watch rested in her trembling hands. Vanessa had spent the entire evening downstairs with Grant and Eleanor drinking wine beside the fireplace, speaking in low voices about legal transitions and protecting family assets. Maddie heard every word through the heating vents. They thought she was too young to understand adult conversations. That was their mistake. Children hear everything adults are careless enough to whisper. The house felt colder without me there. Too quiet. Too polished. Maddie stared down at the watch face beneath her bedroom lamp and realized the ticking had stopped completely sometime after 11. Her breathing tightened instantly. She remembered my voice perfectly. When it stops ticking, call Joe. Fear sat in her chest like ice, but something stronger pushed underneath it now. Determination. The kind children discover only when the person they love most is in danger. Maddie waited until Vanessa went upstairs. She listened carefully to the bedroom door close. Then she moved. Hoodie, sneakers, backpack. The watch clenched tightly inside her pocket. She slipped through the back door into the freezing rain without making a sound. The streets were nearly empty at that hour. Water splashed beneath her shoes while she ran through narrow side roads toward the industrial district. Passing headlights sprayed cold light across her frightened face every few minutes, but she never slowed down. Because somewhere inside her 11-year-old mind, she already understood something terrible. Adults were failing, which meant a child had to save everyone instead. Joe Mercer nearly dropped the coffee mug he was washing when Maddie burst into the diner soaked from head to toe. The bell above the entrance rattled violently as she stumbled inside, gasping for breath. "Joe!" she cried immediately. The watch stopped. Joe's expression changed instantly. He rushed around the counter and grabbed her shoulders. "Where's your mother?" "At home." "Did anyone follow you?" Maddie shook her head while pulling the pocket watch from her hoodie pocket with shaking hands. Joe stared at it for one long second before locking the diner doors and flipping the closed sign around. "Come on," he muttered. Back booth. Rain hammered against the windows while Joe carefully opened the silver casing beneath the yellow booth light. His thick fingers moved with surprising precision as he pressed against the hidden latch inside the mechanism. A tiny compartment slid open beneath the gears, revealing a blinking red light no larger than a grain of rice. Maddie wiped tears from her face while watching him. "What is that?" "Your father's insurance." Joe removed the miniature chip carefully and connected it to an old laptop from beneath the counter. The screen flickered twice before audio files appeared. Time stamps. Location pings. Hidden recordings. Maddie stared in confusion while Joe selected the newest file. Static crackled softly. Then Vanessa's voice filled the diner speakers clear as glass. "You should have stayed small, Ray." Maddie's face went white instantly. Joe listened silently while Vanessa continued speaking from inside the recording. "A quiet man should die quietly." The diner suddenly felt too still, too cold. Maddie covered her mouth with both hands as tears flooded her eyes again. "She really did it," she whispered brokenly. Joe's jaw tightened hard enough to twitch. Then Grant's voice entered another recording discussing property transfers and competency reviews. Enough evidence to destroy careers. Enough evidence to send people to prison. But Joe kept listening because old detectives trusted patterns more than moments. When the final recording ended, he immediately reached for the diner phone. "Who are you calling?" Maddie asked softly. "People who still give a damn." Dr. Samuel Pike arrived less than 30 minutes later wearing a raincoat over wrinkled clothes, exhaustion carved deep into his face. He listened to the recordings twice without interrupting once. By the end, his expression looked murderous. "This is bigger than Raymond," he muttered quietly. "Way bigger." Joe nodded once. "Willow Crest has been doing this for years." Sam looked toward Maddie sitting silently in the booth clutching hot chocolate she barely touched. "Your father knew this might happen," he said gently to her. "That's why he trusted you with the watch." Maddie lowered her eyes immediately. "I was scared." Joe leaned forward carefully. "Kid." His rough voice softened slightly. "Courage isn't when you're not scared. Courage is when you run through the rain anyway." Around 2 in the morning, Joe made one final call. The woman who answered sounded exhausted and irritated until Joe mentioned Willow Crest. Then her tone changed instantly. Sharp. Alert. Dangerous. Nora Fields was one of the last investigative reporters in the state who still destroyed powerful people for a living. She arrived at the diner 45 minutes later carrying a camera bag and legal notebook, her dark hair soaked from the storm outside. Joe played the recordings once. Nora never blinked the entire time. When Vanessa's voice finally faded from the speakers, Nora slowly closed her notebook and looked directly at Maddie. You brought this to him yourself? Maddie nodded nervously. Nora stared at her for another moment before speaking quietly. You may have just saved your father's life. And sitting alone inside Willow Crest beneath the soft white prison lights, I had no idea that the smallest person in my family had just become the most dangerous one. By the time they rolled my wheelchair into the Grand Aurora Ballroom, I already knew the empire Vanessa built from lies was beginning to crack beneath her feet. The ballroom glittered like a palace under gold chandeliers and cascading crystal lights. Wealthy donors drifted between marble columns holding champagne glasses while a string quartet played near the stage. Women in designer gowns laughed too loudly. Men with silver hair and political smiles discussed tax write-offs disguised as philanthropy. The entire night smelled like expensive perfume and corruption. And at the center of it all stood a massive banner stretched above the stage in elegant gold lettering. The Raymond Cole Foundation for Cognitive Care. I almost admired the cruelty of it. Vanessa hadn't just stolen my life. She turned my manufactured illness into a public charity brand. The nurse pushing my wheelchair leaned closer and whispered softly, "Your wife worked so hard organizing this." I kept my eyes dull and unfocused while cameras flashed around us. Confused patient, fragile husband, living prop. That was my role tonight. Across the ballroom, I spotted Claire near the stage wearing a black dress and an expression that looked exhausted beneath the makeup. Grant stood beside her with one hand resting confidently at her waist while introducing her to investors. Even from across the room, I could see Claire forcing smiles she didn't feel. Grant was still feeding her dreams about launching her design company together, still shaping her into a useful extension of himself. My chest tightened briefly when I noticed Maddie standing alone near the back wall beside Joe Mercer and Nora Fields. Maddie's eyes found mine instantly. Fear, hope, determination, all mixed together inside the face of an 11-year-old child forced to become braver than most adults. Joe gave me one subtle nod. Everything was ready. Vanessa appeared moments later wearing a silver evening gown that shimmered beneath the ballroom lights like polished ice. Beautiful, untouchable, dangerous. She leaned down beside my wheelchair and kissed my cheek gently while photographers snapped pictures around us. Smile, sweetheart, she whispered softly through clenched teeth. Just a little longer. Then she straightened elegantly and walked toward the stage while the audience applauded. Watching her move through the crowd was like watching a queen returning to her throne. Every movement precise, every expression rehearsed. Nobody in that ballroom saw the predator beneath the diamonds. Vanessa stepped behind the podium and lowered her eyes emotionally before speaking into the microphone. Thank you all for being here tonight. Her voice echoed warmly through the ballroom speakers. As many of you know, my husband Raymond has been battling severe cognitive decline over the past year. A few sympathetic murmurs spread through the audience. Vanessa paused dramatically before continuing. The man I married dedicated his life to hard work, honesty, and protecting others. Even now, she glanced toward me with practiced heartbreak. Even now, though Raymond may not remember us, we will protect his legacy. Applause exploded across the ballroom. I heard Eleanor sniff dramatically near the front row. Grant lowered his head respectfully like a grieving son carrying impossible responsibility. Oscar-worthy performances from all of them. Vanessa continued speaking about compassion, neurological care, and dignity for aging families while giant screens behind the stage displayed carefully selected photographs of me smiling beside her during vacations and charity galas. A manufactured love story for public consumption. But beneath the ballroom lights, I noticed tiny details beginning to shift. Nora Fields moving quietly toward the media control booth near the back wall. Joe checking his watch. Maddie clutching the silver pocket watch tightly against her chest like it was the last honest thing left in the room. Then Grant stepped onto the stage beside Vanessa carrying a thick leather folder. Tonight, he announced smoothly, we're also proud to introduce Claire Cole as future creative director and business partner for the Foundation's expansion initiative. Claire looked startled by the sudden announcement. She forced a nervous smile while cameras turned toward her. Grant wrapped an arm around her waist possessively. Claire represents the next generation of the Cole legacy. Lie after lie after lie. He was still trying to bind her financially before the collapse came. Grant opened the folder and removed legal documents while Vanessa watched from beside him smiling proudly. These final transition agreements, he continued confidently, will officially secure management authority and charitable asset protection moving forward. That was the moment the ballroom lights flickered once. Tiny. Brief. Most guests barely noticed. Then the giant projection screens behind the stage suddenly went black. Grant frowned immediately. What the hell? Static crackled loudly through the speakers. The audience shifted uneasily. Vanessa turned sharply toward the media booth. Then the video started playing. The first image showed Vanessa standing in our kitchen beneath dim evening light, crystal clear, her hand opening capsules over my teacup, white powder falling silently into the liquid. The ballroom went dead quiet instantly. Vanessa's face lost all color. "Turn that off," she snapped immediately. But the next recording started before anyone moved. Grant's voice filled the speakers. "After the papers are signed, we move him to the facility." Another voice. "Vanessa. Cold. Tom. The girl can go to boarding school." Then Grant laughed softly. "The old fool will never prove anything." Gasps spread through the ballroom like wildfire. Claire stared at the screens in absolute horror. Her entire body went rigid beside Grant. More footage appeared. The private neurologist accepting cash inside a parking garage. Willow Crest staff forcing trembling elderly residents to sign transfer papers. Sedated patients crying in locked rooms. Vanessa whispering inside my room at Willow Crest. "You should have stayed small, Ray." Another clip. "A quiet man should die quietly." Panic erupted instantly across the ballroom. Donors stood from tables shouting questions. Cameras turned violently toward the stage. Eleanor looked ready to faint. Grant lunged toward the technician booth screaming for someone to shut the feed down. But Nora Field stepped directly into his path holding press credentials and a live broadcast camera behind her. "Too late," she said coldly. Claire stumbled backward away from Grant like she'd finally seen the monster standing beside her clearly for the first time. "Claire," Grant snapped urgently, reaching for her arm. She jerked away instantly. "Don't touch me." Vanessa grabbed the microphone desperately. "These videos are fake." Her voice cracked now. "They've been manipulated." But nobody was listening anymore. Because at that exact moment, I slowly placed both hands on the wheelchair arms and stood up. The ballroom fell silent so fast it felt like the air itself stopped moving. I could hear camera shutters clicking somewhere near the stage. Vanessa stared at me in complete horror. Grant froze mid-step. Claire covered her mouth with trembling hands. I stood there beneath the chandelier lights, no longer slumped, no longer confused, no longer weak. Just a man looking directly at the people who tried to bury him alive. Then I spoke the words that shattered the room completely. "I remember everything." Absolute silence followed. Heavy. Suffocating. Disbelieving. Vanessa's face drained completely white beneath the stage lights. Grant looked like someone had punched straight through his chest. Around the ballroom, wealthy donors stared at me with the same horrified expression people wear when they realized they applauded evil only seconds earlier. I looked directly at Vanessa while security guards and reporters rushed through the chaos behind her. "You poisoned me." My voice echoed coldly across the ballroom. "You tried to erase me." Then I turned slowly toward Grant. "And you mistook kindness for weakness." Somewhere behind the crowd, Maddie started crying quietly. Not from fear this time. Relief. Because the ghost they buried inside Willow Crest had just stood back up in front of the entire world. The silence after I stood from the wheelchair lasted only 3 seconds. Then the ballroom exploded into chaos. Reporters surged toward the stage like wolves smelling blood. Wealthy donors stumbled backward from their tables in disbelief while cameras flashed so rapidly the entire room pulsed white every few seconds. Vanessa remained frozen beside the podium, staring at me with the face of someone watching a corpse sit upright inside its coffin. Grant recovered first. Men like him always did. Survival instinct. Calculation. Panic hidden beneath performance. "This is a setup," he snapped loudly, stepping toward the microphone. "These recordings are illegally manipulated." But nobody was listening anymore. Because the giant screens behind him were still playing footage from Willow Crest. Sedated residents crying in locked rooms. Nurses forcing trembling signatures onto transfer documents. The fake neurologist accepting envelopes of cash beside a black SUV. Every polished lie in the room was collapsing publicly in real time. Then the ballroom doors burst open. Uniformed officers flooded inside alongside state investigators and federal financial crime agents. The music stopped instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. One detective walked directly toward the stage holding a warrant folder in one hand. "Grant Ellis," he called sharply. "DR. Harold Levin. Director Samuel Pierce." Nobody leaves this building. Panic spread visibly now. Near the back of the ballroom, the private neurologist who diagnosed me with early dementia tried slipping toward a service hallway before 2 officers intercepted him immediately. Another team moved toward the Willow Crest executive standing near the donor tables. The man's face turned gray as agents seized his phone and briefcase. It was beautiful to watch. Not because of revenge. Because predators finally looked afraid. Grant grabbed Claire's wrist suddenly. Hard. Too hard. Come with me, he hissed under his breath. Claire jerked slightly from the force while cameras swung toward them instantly. Grant. Now. His polished mask was gone completely now. Sweat gathered near his temples beneath the ballroom lights. You signed the investment agreements too. Claire's expression changed immediately. Fear. Confusion. Realization. What? You're attached to the company financially, he snapped urgently. If I go down, you go down with me. There it was. The truth finally naked in public. He never loved her. She was leverage. Insurance. Another asset tied to paperwork and manipulation. Claire stared at him like she was seeing a stranger wearing her boyfriend's face. You used me. Grant lowered his voice sharply. Claire, listen carefully. We leave together right now, or she ripped her arm away so violently he lost balance for half a second. Then, without saying another word, Claire grabbed the investment contract folder from his hands. The ballroom cameras followed every movement. Every guest watched silently while she flipped through the pages with trembling fingers. I saw tears building in her eyes. Not weakness. Mourning. Mourning the illusion she spent years trying to believe in. Then she tore the contract directly down the middle. The sound ripped through the ballroom louder than shouting. Grant stared at the shredded pages falling across the stage floor like snow. Claire's voice shook when she finally spoke. You don't get to own me too. The crowd erupted into frantic whispers again. Reporters pushed closer. Grant lunged toward her angrily, but two officers grabbed him before he reached her. Get your hands off me, he shouted while struggling violently now. Gone was the charming lawyer. Gone was the polished businessman. Under pressure, predators always become exactly what they are. Cornered animals. Mr. Ellis, one detective said coldly, you are under investigation for financial fraud, elder abuse conspiracy, coercion, and multiple counts of signature falsification. Grant's face drained completely white. This is bullshit. We also found $17 million in undisclosed debt linked to shell companies under your name. The room reacted audibly to that. Grant looked toward Claire desperately now. Claire, tell them. Don't, she whispered brokenly. Please don't talk to me anymore. Across the ballroom, Vanessa finally moved. Slowly at first, then faster. She slipped off the stage while security and reporters swarmed toward Grant. Even now, her instincts were survival first. She headed directly toward the rear service exit near the kitchen corridor, heels clicking rapidly across marble floors. But when she reached the doorway, she stopped abruptly. Maddie stood there waiting. Small, fragile looking, 11 years old beneath an oversized gray hoodie. Yet somehow she was the only person in the room Vanessa seemed afraid to face. Cameras immediately turned toward them too. Vanessa's expression hardened instantly. Move. Maddie didn't. Rain hammered softly against the emergency exit doors behind her while the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath again. Vanessa lowered her voice sharply. Maddie, this isn't the time. My daughter stared up at her with tears shining in her eyes, but her voice came out steady anyway. You told everyone Dad was broken. Vanessa glanced nervously toward the reporters approaching behind her. Sweetheart, you don't understand what's happening. Maddie shook her head slowly. No. Her voice cracked slightly then strengthened again. You were the broken one. The silence after those words felt heavier than anything else that night. Vanessa looked around desperately as cameras captured every angle of her collapsing world. No more elegant wife. No more charity queen. No more grieving caretaker. Just a frightened woman trapped inside the truth she created. Reporters closed and immediately afterward shouting questions from every direction. MRS. Cole, did you drug your husband? How long was Willow Crest operating illegally? Did you falsify dementia claims? Did you target other patients? Flashbulbs exploded around her face non-stop now. Vanessa tried speaking twice, but nothing coherent came out. For the first time since I met her, she looked small. Truly small. Not because she lost money. Not because she was caught. Because the world finally saw her without the mask. Nearby, officers escorted Grant through the ballroom in handcuffs while he continued shouting about lawyers and conspiracies. Nobody listened anymore. The donors avoided eye contact as he passed. Men who shook his hand an hour earlier suddenly acted like he carried disease. That was the thing about high society. Loyalty only exists until scandal enters the room. I stood quietly near the stage while the entire empire collapsed around me piece by piece. Joe appeared beside me eventually, folding his arms while watching investigators seize documents from the Willow Crest executives. You okay? He asked softly. I looked across the ballroom toward Vanessa as reporters trapped her beneath the lights. She looked exhausted now. Older somehow. Hollowed out. For a long moment, I searched myself for anger, for satisfaction, for hatred. But strangely, none of it remained anymore. Because I finally understood something important. The greatest revenge isn't violence. It's truth. Truth destroys people slowly, publicly, completely. I didn't need to hit Grant. I didn't need to scream at Vanessa. I didn't need revenge fantasies or dramatic threats. I simply survived long enough for reality to walk into the room. And once it did, the lies devoured themselves. 1 year later, I wake up every morning to the sound of water touching the rocks behind our little lake house instead of the sound of locked doors and medication carts rolling through white hallways. The place is smaller than the old house Vanessa once turned into a museum of polished lies, but this home actually breathes. The wooden floors creak when Maddie runs downstairs before school. The kitchen smells like coffee and toasted bread instead of expensive perfume covering hidden poison. Sunlight pours through the windows every morning and settles softly across the dining table where Claire now spreads out client files beside her sketchbooks. Real life finally returned to us quietly, one ordinary day at a time. I spend most mornings on the back porch repairing old watches again. Not because I need the money anymore, but because the sound of tiny gears clicking back into place reminds me that broken things are still capable of working if someone patient enough refuses to throw them away. Sometimes Claire sits beside me with legal folders stacked across her lap while asking questions about fraud patterns, forged signatures, or asset transfers. She took over part of my old valuation work 6 months ago, but unlike the people we once trusted, she uses it differently. She helps elderly victims recover stolen estates now, helps families investigate suspicious guardianships, helps frightened people prove they are not crazy when powerful relatives try to erase them quietly. The first time she won a case for an old man abandoned by his sons inside a private care facility, she cried in the car afterward for almost 20 minutes. Not because she was weak, because she finally understood how close she came to helping destroy her own father. We never talk about that night directly anymore. We don't need to. Healing isn't built from endless apologies. It's built from what people choose to become afterward. Maddie keeps the silver pocket watch on the shelf beside her bed. The metal casing still carries scratches from all the years I used it during investigations before she was even born. Sometimes I catch her staring at it quietly while doing homework. Not because she sees it as evidence or technology. To her, it means something else now. Courage. Proof that being small doesn't mean being powerless. Last month her teacher called because Maddie stood up to older boys bullying another student in school. When I asked why she got involved, she shrugged and said something that nearly broke my heart. Somebody has to say something before it gets worse. Children remember more than adults realize, especially brave children. The trials lasted months. Willow Crest shut down permanently. Investigations spread into 3 different states afterward. Families came forward one by one. Hidden abuse, forced signatures, sedation fraud, financial exploitation. The beautiful white prison finally collapsed beneath the weight of its own secrets. Grant took a plea deal after investigators uncovered forged investment documents, shell companies, and enough debt to bury him for life. Vanessa fought harder. Even at the end, she still believed appearances could save her. But cameras eventually stopped loving people once the mask slips too far. I saw her only once after sentencing. Across a courtroom. No hatred left between us by then. Just emptiness. She looked older. Smaller somehow. Like someone who spent so many years pretending to be powerful that she forgot how hollow she really was underneath it all. I used to think family meant the people sitting around your dinner table. Blood, marriage, shared last names. I know better now. Family is the person who believes you when the world calls you crazy. Family is the child who runs through the rain searching for truth when your voice has been taken away. Family is the daughter who tears apart the contract that was meant to chain her. And sometimes, a father has to pretend to fall apart completely just to teach the people betraying him one final lesson. Quiet men are not weak men. We simply learn patience before we choose when to stand back up.